Welcome to the Mob Mentality Podcast. I'm your host, Dustin Thostenson. Today, I'm excited to introduce my guest. Look at my notes here. Chris Chadwick and Austin Lucian?
Not quite.
Chris Lucian and Austin Chadwick. We've got a little bit of a different podcast today. I'd reached out to the guys and said, what if we mix it up a little bit? What if I interview them and ask them some stories about what mob mentality is meant for them, how they got started, where they're going, and allow them to be in the spotlight for a change. So, Chris, do you want to introduce yourself to my audience?
Yeah, sure. I'm Chris Lucian. I've been mob programming for, I think, the last 12 years now, it looks like. Well, on and off because of the role I've been in, but it's good stuff, and yeah, that's me.
I'm Austin Chadwick, and thank you, Dustin, for letting us speak to your audience. I appreciate this. And Austin Chadwick, been software engineering about 15 years, 5 years waterfall, 5 years traditional Scrum, and then 5 years mob programming. Actually, in about a couple weeks, it'll be 5 years exactly of full-time mob programming. So it's almost anniversary of sorts. And so probably by the time this episode is out, that's a little bit about me. And what are you thinking, Dustin?
I'm thinking that I spend my weekends working in the garage and mowing the lawn and listening to the Mob Mentality podcast and getting a chance to learn from other people. And I'm curious, how did this all start? At what point did you say, you know what, we need to tell the people?
Yeah, I think I'll take this one, Chris, because so after Chris and I started working together, I was going to him a lot for coaching. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but you said something like, oh, you should start a blog, or, you should do something like that.
I think I said that you had a lot of really good ideas around Agile, Lean, TDD, XP, all that stuff. And it's like, you should kind of codify that, put it somewhere that it can live for a long time, a blog or other things like that. Yep.
And so I think it was later that night, me and my wife were out to dinner, had someone babysit the kids, and we were talking about it. I'm like, I don't, maybe start a blog. I don't know. And we were brainstorming, and she's like, well, I actually did some research, and there is no one doing podcast or YouTube channel stuff, at least on a consistent basis, for mob programming. Like there's websites and there's other things. And I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. But I just imagined myself alone with a microphone starting a podcast. And it just felt really lonely and weird, especially if the show is about, collective doing stuff together, like mobbing and ensembling and stuff. And so I went back to Chris and said, like, hey, I think I'm going to start a podcast, but do you want to join me?
And I immediately said no, and then eventually came around to the idea.
Yeah. I think I forgot exactly how it came to a yes. I don't think what happened? I think we just kind of walked through what your thoughts were, and then you know what I think it was? So similar to how when we're mob programming, we'll just be like, let's just run the experiment and see what happens.
Yeah.
We were just like, okay, let's just try and see what happens. And we had a few failed experiments, even to get the first recording done, because for anybody who's been a guest on the show, we have a checklist, and some of the items are like, make sure the laptop's plugged in. I think that was one of our first recordings had that problem where it wasn't plugged in and it just powered off right as we were recording.
Or it doesn't overheat, like the temperature in the room was too hot and
it
turns off mid-episode. But yeah, it was a little bit of how it started. We just kind of got going. I think I gave you some advice around like being consistent with release, which is how we got to our like weekly release cycle. We kind of talked about whether or not we'd mention the company we're in currently and all this other stuff. And we basically came to the idea that we just like leave it independent, and and so we've kind of been recording during our lunch breaks, that sort of thing. So
Yeah, and I felt like that was really cool because when we started doing it, you helped almost take those kind of lean agile principles and apply it to podcasting, in the sense that like, is this going to be valuable or not? And instead of trying to speculate, let's just try and put a few things out there and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so it was discover experimentally, and then, like you said, consistent release frequency, and then sustainability, right? So both of us are wife and kids, very busy, and so spending hours on end doing podcasting is not sustainable for us. And so whatever we do, we had to make it very lean. Right. And so we started with those goals. And I think for me, I don't know about you, Chris, the reason why I decided to go for it was if we publish a few episodes, nobody watches it, it will still be valuable for me, because it'll be good learning for me. Like it'll just be a good learning experience to try to speak and interview others and share and do all those kinds of things. And I think my goal all along has been, is it sustainable? And am I learning? And is it helping? I think if it got 0 views, I'd probably stop doing it. Like it wasn't helping anybody. But is it helping anybody else at all? Maybe it's not as popular as the cat videos on YouTube, but how about you, Chris? What kind of your goals? I'm curious going into it.
Well, so I ran my blog for a long time, and I'll tell people that every one of my blogs was basically me preparing to have a discussion with someone that I had to convince. And so if you go to chrislucian.com and read some of those blogs, you can see, if you look at it with that lens of like, big conversations coming up, that's a pivotal moment, for the team, you can kind of see like where my motivation around blogging had come from. And kind of like since we started this, I haven't blogged as much, but I do still put out a blog whenever I'm in that kind of situation. And so you can see stuff about estimation and other things in there, and mobbing in general. There's like the financial benefits of mobbing post as well. So anyway, kind of to make the long story short there, a lot of the satisfaction that I got out of blogging those things, I got from this show, and just kind of externalizing a lot of things that I've been thinking about. And the interviews are a lot of fun to do. So just meeting people like Dustin and doing the show with them has just been a blast. So I'm fulfilled both socially and maybe academically by these episodes.
Now, neither of you have done a podcast before, correct?
Nope.
No, I've just been on podcasts in the past, and that's about it. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about that 0 to 1, right? Going from 0 to 1 is the hardest part. Was there anything in there about some imposter syndrome? Maybe like I'm not a podcaster. Maybe I'm not the best person to be talking about mobbing and ensemble programming.
Yeah, for me, absolutely. And I think there were 2 things that helped with that. One is kind of the just sharing principle, which is, I think, and this is something else you started us with, Chris, that I thought was helpful, which was the primary aim of the show is to share our experiences and perspective, not necessarily here's a dissertation on topic X. And so it's kind of more of a story sharing show, and not a here is the way to do it, prescriptive way to do it, guaranteed to work. I highly recommend it and you must do it or you're not smart kind of show. And so I think kind of the just sharing mindset that we picked up from, I know I picked it up from you, Chris, and others in the community like Woody Zool and Jason Kearney, but I'm not sure originally where it came from.
That might have originated with Woody and the no estimates movement. At least that's where I understand it came from.
Yeah, exactly. So just sharing kind of lowers the bar. And then for me, that I feel like it's the same with software too, is that, let's say you're going to create a product, and if you're like, okay, let's make a pipeline, and it releases a hello world app, and it releases it to the test store, for example, or something, just like something really bare bones, like, oh, it only releases it to one user, or a few users. I think making the expectations really low for that first one kind of helps. At least helped me, say like, hey, I'm not claiming to be an experienced podcaster here. I'm just running an experiment. We're going to see how it goes. We'll be open about that with the community, that like, hey, we're going to try this out and see how it goes, and we're interested in your feedback. Yeah.
Like one thing that was really inspiring to me was there was kind of a vidcast that I was watching, and they had kind of really short weekly episodes, and so I don't think we were really even trying to be a full-on podcast, and we just figured out, how can we get a few of those things out there. As far as imposter syndrome, maybe I'm just a little bit too much of the like try it, and if it doesn't work then it's fine sort of person. But yeah, I don't think either of us really had any like, well, I'll speak for myself. I didn't really have any like anxiety about like, oh, what if it fails? Like, what if it's awful? Like, it'd be fine. So yeah. Extra credits was the one. It was like a video game design vidcast, and so if you know extra credits, it's I think just some of my thinking around what our version of podcasting might be came from there.
So it takes the 10,000 hours of dedicated practice to become an expert. And I don't think you guys are there technically yet with this podcast. However, I'm assuming at one point you may have had that realization that this thing is taking legs. It's building a community, and you're starting to feel pretty good about that. Did you have that realization? Was there that moment where you said, this doesn't suck as bad as it could have?
Well, I'm always surprised at how many comments come in. Right? So like, it's just really cool. I think having videos out there is one thing, but having comments come in and either replying to them or kind of seeing the mob mentality handle reply to them has been, that's where it's like the number of those that come in, that's really cool, and you get ideas for new episodes and all this other stuff. So for me, that's a little bit of that. It's like, whoa, like people are engaging with the content on a deep level, and that's and I think lately we've seen a lot more of that, which has been really cool.
Yeah, and I guess for me, I mean, if you look at the numbers on Anywhere stuff, it's not gigantic, but it was more than I expected, which was fun, which is nice to see. But the biggest thing for me was kind of going back to the original goals. Am I learning? And every episode I was learning a ton, from every guest we had or everything we had to share. And like, it's funny how many times I learned from Chris during the show. It's like in the moment. And so learning was happening. And like Chris was saying, the comments coming back saying like, hey, we tried mobbing today after watching this video and it's working really well for us. Or, hey, this helped me work through a tough spot or something. Any of those comments where it's like, hey, I'm not only learning something, but this sharing it is helping others. One thing that did help at the very beginning, maybe I can go try to find the tweet, trying to remember the individual's name, but we posted on social media something like, oh, we're gonna try an experiment and publish an episode, and then someone in the mobbing community responded back with like this gif of like, well, we're waiting. I think it was from
Princess Bride,
Caddyshack.
Or the Caddyshack.
Yeah. And so it was kind of like, oh, people are actually interested in this, So yeah, that was a fun moment for me.
When you bring up something interesting, there is that kind of dichotomy of that which brings value to you and that which brings value for the community. So I've seen the community growing. I appreciate the interactions on Twitter and listening to the podcast and getting to, hear a lot of fresh ideas. But how else? Let's just kind of be selfish a little bit. How has it been good for your own personal development and even some of your career development?
Well, for me, I think that some of the things, one big benefit to all of this, just hosting anything like this or writing a blog or anything like that, is once you get your thoughts kind of solidified on some sort of shareable medium, there some things that were maybe a little bit amorphous become concrete. And so, one big, every one of these episodes for me, and especially when I can chime in about some particular topic, maybe helps me harden some ideas to the point of description and so, going back and working with a group after recording an episode on a similar topic has just in general, or maybe taking a recent experience and turning that into an episode has been incredibly helpful. I've also shared a number of episodes with people that just had questions around things, and so there's this like benefit of, one of my goals, that kind of going back to goals with this, one of my goals is that anything that I have to say over and over again is recorded somewhere so that I can just send them the episode and then have a discussion afterwards. And that's incredibly fulfilling to me. Like, one big thing I and you've heard me talk about on the show, is just automation in general. So this is a way for me to automate conversations. Like, I can just say, here's the first half of this conversation and how it'll go. Now let's talk about the rest, any further questions, things like that. And so that's been incredibly beneficial as well, as just to have this resource that's fleshed out. And so, maybe those two things have helped tremendously for me.
Scott Hanselman has that same mindset. He would blog a lot because he believes he has a limited number of keystrokes left in his hand.
Yeah.
So instead of typing the same message over and over, he's going to type it once.
Yep.
Yeah. And I have seen that too, Chris, where I'll find myself like responding in the community, whether it's direct message or like a public post of some kind. And I'll get about 2 sentences in and I'm like, oh, wait, this is somewhere. And sometimes it's someone else's resource, and sometimes it's our own episode. And I'm like, I don't have to write a paragraph. This has already been stated, and I'll just go grab it and link it. And so that does help save time. And, because time, like you said, time is very valuable. And so for those in your life, optimizing the time, is making the most of it, is good. Yeah, for me, a few things came out. I really like what you said, Chris, about like teaching is the best way of learning. And I'm not sure if we're necessarily teaching on here, but it helps it get ingrained in my mind better, whatever concepts we're talking about or asking others about. And so it's kind of like mobbing. When you navigate, you're learning it deeper than if you were just doing it in your own head and coding alone, kind of thing. And so I feel a similar effect from there. It makes it easier to talk about and apply the concepts when you have more concrete ideas in your head, and ways to talk about it and ways to experiment with it. It's funny because if you probably look at the code commits or messages with our team or any artifacts from our team, whatever episode we recorded recently, whatever we learned from guests, will show up in the code in some way, or show up in an experiment or a continuous improvement retro item in some way. And I'll notice that in Chris as well. I'll see like a message he sent to the organization or something, and I'm like, oh, that sounds like so-and-so we just interviewed, or or something
100%.
He just shared, and so the influence definitely goes multiple ways. And it also comes from the feedback from the community at large. So whether they respond with comments on YouTube or on Twitter or LinkedIn or other places, whether it's a correction, an encouragement, a story, like a supporting story or a countering story, all those things help a lot, because one way to it's kind of like testing products in the market, testing ideas in the marketplace of ideas, is you put them out there and you get feedback on them. So oftentimes I'll start, kind of like with mobbing. On the show, I'll say A, and then someone in the community be like, not A, B, and then we'll talk back and forth a little bit, and it's going to be like, oh, you're right, that part of A I was wrong, but I did have a point here, so it's like A/B, and so I take that learning forward, where if it was just between me, myself, and I and those ideas in a smaller group, I might have not gotten that rad can from the community. And the other thing for me was, I'm a little bit newer in the Agile and mobbing community. And so being able to meet a lot of people in the community has been really helpful and great, just like networking in general, and then also resources in general, where if it's kind of like, I don't really know about that thing, but I did talk to somebody once about that thing, and I can reach out to them or refer someone to them or something. So that's been good.
You got a few different areas I'd like to kind of jump off of on that. One of them, I'm looking at my notes here. I wrote down WTFP, which is watch the free podcast. Shorthand to help people out with that. I'm trying to remember. You guys might be able to let me know what show I'm thinking of. I was watching a show recently. I think it was on podcast. It was taking place back in the 60s about FBI detectives that were researching serial killers.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't remember the name.
I don't either. I enjoyed it. But in that, they were getting to meet these different serial killers, and they were asked, who's the big one? And I go, not Marilyn Manson, Charles Manson.
Yes.
A little early from Maryland. Charles Manson. They said, man, if you could get us to talk to Charles Manson, that's the big one. Who's your Charles Manson? That's not
Who's your Charles Manson?
There's some people out there though that you would still really love to kind of pick their brains and take some of the things that they share with you and bring back to the team to continue to experiment. You've already got Dustin Thostenson twice, so that's check.
Yeah. One big fish done. Yeah. Nice. I think I'll throw in one in that at least twice, but I feel like it's been, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. People have recommended we get Amy Edmondson on the show.
Just finished her book.
Yeah. And then I think same with like Kent Beck. And I think I do not know a lot about this world, even though we invite people on the show a lot, but often it's kind of more like people you kind of know. So it's like the network is like degree 2 or at most 3. But I get the feeling with certain people that they have like a staff and a very busy schedule and things. And so I'm not even sure if you can message these people and stuff. And so it would be nice.
Get through their Twitter handle probably. People that look at Twitter versus people that have hired somebody to look at Twitter, right?
Right. Yeah. And so I think we've tried, but I think I understand that they have a lot going on, and that's awesome.
So for me, I kind of going through, additional signatories of the Agile Manifesto and that, people that we haven't had on yet. I also think, part of me also really wants to like talk to maybe the up and comers, the people with the new ideas, those sorts of things. Because even though it's mob mentality show and we're largely based around mob programming, I think it's just like, mobbing now is a 10-year-old thing, and there's probably other stuff in this space that we can explore more. And it's kind of like exploring the unexplored potentials, like a sort of thing I like to say is like, if you can, what are those kind of weird, kind of wacky things that people hadn't heard about? I'd like to interview more of those.
Yeah, and I'll yes and to that. You'll notice that if you look in the history of episodes, often it for guests, sometimes it is kind of what you're talking about, Chris, where it's like, oh, that's new and different. I want to learn more about that. And then we'll invite the person on,
Yeah.
to come share their story. Yeah, future warning, if you comment and start sharing ideas, there's a chance you might get invited on, because it is really cool to hear like a grassroots experience someone had that is something, and a new experiment they tried, or even just like I'm thinking back to one of them was like, hey, we started a mobbing type thing with UX people in a different time zone, and here are the results of it. And we're like, oh, I want to learn more about that. And so we would share that. So we would invite them on and then do that story. And so I think that kind of goes back to original goals, which is to interview the big gurus is awesome. Like there's a lot of questions I have, and for many of the big gurus. But also getting the kind of grassroots storytelling of people trying stuff and seeing how it goes, good, bad, and the ugly. I love that too.
One more that I thought of is anybody completing an academic study on mobbing. I'd like to bring them to. It's like something that, because that's also like, I think one service maybe that the podcasts provides is people looking for ways to convince the people they work with to mob or ensemble, right? That's something that I think, this is a resource for. And so, I'd like to see, anything that can help, anyone that should be on the show that can help people with some level of justification should they need it.
Thinking about the Accelerate book.
Like
Dr. Cole Forsgren, right? If I'm pronouncing your name right.
I don't know.
I thought that was fabulous, where they used the Puppet Labs State of DevOps report. They collected the information. They took a look that these practices lead to better business outcomes. It is not the passionate nerd who's trying to push a tool. It is a practice that has been proven beneficial, and they did the work, right? And I thought that was kind of beautiful. So having something like that would be pretty neat.
Yep. The appeal to authority, I like to say, is, if you're having trouble convincing people of something, find a way to appeal to authority, or convince their friend who will then convince them. That those sorts of things are important, right?
Yeah, and I think I haven't studied it in depth, but it does seem like there have been quite a bit of statistical, more academic studies on pairing, but it hasn't. I don't know. There have been quite a few papers on mobbing, but I don't know if it was done at that kind of level or mathematicalness.
Well, so I know that we've had some episodes, and maybe we need to follow up, but we've had some episodes with people that were in the middle of a study, right? And so, sometimes those papers take years to write, and so it'd be interesting to see, something that can, kind of grow things on that level. Or maybe there's proof that mobbing is not the best thing in the world to do, and maybe we should stop. But that'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to interview somebody that says we should stop mobbing because, like that sort of thing. That would also, I'm all for it. So it maybe doesn't answer your question completely, but
no, there's definitely something to that. I reflect back when I had I've been a developer for a few years here. I earned the Grays, and I remember in the early 2000s when I was on my first team that was doing Scrum, they literally put them in the closet because they didn't want the customers walking through and seeing that mess. And a while when we were doing that, as I moved across companies, I was explaining to people for the first time what Scrum was, what's TDD, what's a backlog, what's fitness. They hadn't heard it. And what I realized is that as we would move around, developers found this is a really good way for us to work. This is much better. And that would go to a point where there was a ceiling of some level of manager who was willing to support it. And we would talk, we would find out where in town were the places where we could practice our craft. And you started seeing people kind of moving together because they got to work the way that they wanted, not to steal from Paige Watson's Fast Agile, but we saw that. And then there was a pivot where we didn't have to sell anymore. It became the norm. Maybe there was some CEO conferences where everybody said you had to do Agile. And then all of a sudden the pressure came from the top that says, why aren't you Agiling?
Yeah.
There's different approaches to that. And when you talk about having those conversations with yourself, the practicing, I've recognized that as I've done some coaching engagements as well, where sometimes at the hotel lobby, at the bar, we may be kind of pontificating to each other. And I realize we're not really complaining to each other. We're kind of practicing the message. So when you do come in, you are able to be a little bit more pointed and clear, and maybe thinking about the people that you're talking to, what are the things that they care about and what do they need to hear?
Yeah.
And that got to be a little bit easier then, because you could put yourself in their shoes and maybe talk to their concerns. Whereas from a technical point of view, from a mathematical certainty point of view, it might make sense to us, but that might not be what they need to hear.
No, yeah. And that's a really good point. And I think I like what you're saying, Dustin and Chris. And I think the thing I'll add on to it is, and it is good when you're having those conversations to share the good, bad, and the ugly, because at the end of the day, there are some principles that are kind of unchanging, at least I hold to, but a lot of it is kind of in the practice realm, which is very contextual. And like any engineering product solution, there are pros and cons, right? And so like if you're reading through refactoring to patterns, it's like, here are the advantages of this pattern, or here are the disadvantages. Here are the contexts where it applies, and here are the contexts where it doesn't apply. And so having more, like the more studies and the more people sharing their experiences, the more it can bring light to those things, which can help fuel the next innovation, right? And so be like, maybe we can try this. Here are the pros, here are some potential cons. And then as the community grows, it'll help discover the next thing that helps have less cons, hopefully. Yeah.
I'd like to share my screen really quick here. Oh, maybe I'll tell you what, I'm going to share an image with you. If one of you could bring this up, please.
Oh.
Because I think it kind of fits into what we're talking about here. I'm not going to rickroll you as far as
Yeah, as far as here, I zoomed in a little bit on it and I can share my screen.
Oh, Chris has got it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is a good one.
So this is one of my favorite images I came across a couple of years ago. And I think about it a lot when I'm trying to have a conversation. I think about where my head is at. Am I in the information area? Am I talking about the knowledge which has all the connections? Do I feel that there's a starting and an ending point that I want to get to? Or am I able to impart wisdom where I can get to the point in the best path possible?
Mm-hmm.
So while we were talking, some of that wisdom started to come out. But I also recognize when I'm having conversations with people, especially very smart and passionate people, sometimes those conversations can kind of be in the information or knowledge area. And it might be a little difficult to understand what is their real insight or what is the wisdom that they're trying to get to. So knowing all the kinds of people that I've worked with, all of the incredibly talented and smart and passionate people that I've worked with and you've worked with, and knowing some of the people that you interview in podcast, what are some of the things that you've learned when you have people with a lot of passion, but they might not be getting to the path, or to be able to track and guide them to that path of wisdom to kind of give a succinct and valuable message? It's a tough question.
That is a tough question. What is the meaning of the universe?
Well, maybe it's helpful to describe to everyone the image itself. So, we have data, which is a number of empty circles, and then information, color coded circles afterwards. Knowledge is the link between those circles. Insight is, highlighting two disparate circles, and then wisdom is like the path between those highlights. So that's the image if anybody is listening in. I think that there are common themes through everything that we interact with, and everyone that we interact with, and there are also differences of opinion in some areas, and so I do think that I've seen connections, and sometimes it's just your environment, right? There's this idea that if you're surrounded by people that are not working this way, then maybe it's not possible to realize the benefits. And and there are different ways to, so again, it's like appealing to authority, convincing. Is it a grassroots thing? Does it come from the top, or is it the change companies sort of thing, or change who you're working with? All of those things can definitely be related. I think wisdom sometimes comes from failing so many times that your insights have accumulated over time, and so sometimes it is like you just got to try it and not do well at it at first to understand what is better. And so I think for me, working this way has come from a space of I am where I am today because I'm standing on top of a mountain of failures that I've learned from. Right. And so that is a little bit of it. So like if you're new to it and trying to understand everything that we talk about on this show, it's going to be very different for you than looking at this show 10, 20 years into your career, right?
Yeah, and I think I agree with you, Chris. The way I've heard it before is it's meant as a joke, not really literal, but I've heard it referred to as the dumb tax. It's like you either pay it yourself or you see someone else pay it and then you learn from it, right? And I think in a lot of things it's not necessarily dumb. It's just experimenting. But one thing I do acknowledge from whether you're reading a book or talking to someone, or like we interview someone on the show and learn from them, is that it helps enhance that learning because of learning from others and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And then you combine it with your own experiences, because I feel like you need both, right? Both are important. There's no need to repeat some experiments because they're clearly not going to be good for the engineering version of playing on the freeway. And there's some experiments worth doing, and that helps you craft them, I suppose, when you combine both kinds of things. Some other things that jump out to me, and I'm not sure if where it falls into your picture there, Dustin, but it's a big realization I've been having ever since mobbing. And I think the show, interviewing people on the show, has helped a lot add to it as well, is that people are people, code is code, work is work, and that there are differences. There are a lot of differences in the details, but there are some principles that apply kind of universally in all those areas. So, working well with others, there's some things that apply to make that do well for good psychological safety, whether you're working on code in 2023 or you're having a conversation in 500 BC. There's some things there that are applicable. And I think the more I talked with others and worked on different code bases, the differences are kind of obvious. But what I'm struck by is that there's a lot of principles that are the same amongst code. And I guess from a lean perspective, work, right? Me and my wife were listening to a murder mystery book. I think it's Dorothy Sayers, but it was talking about an ad agency in the, I think it was the 20s or 30s or something. And they were talking about how ridiculous the flow was to get work done. It was a joke. It was making fun of a lot of things in the ad agency, and it just hit me like, yeah, lean, inefficiencies are the same whether you're in an ad agency in the 30s or you're working on code in, the common today. So yeah, those are some things that jumped out to me.
Well, and you mentioned those principles. I look at that as models in general, and how interesting it is to learn different models and find that models in a completely different realm might actually apply to the things that you're doing today if you just use that tool a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And through the people that you talk to, I'm assuming that you start learning a lot of different models. I've heard you talk before about the jargon, the shorthand comments, the quick ways to exchange ideas with people. What are some of the models that you have discovered, maybe even recently or through the journey, that have really kind of stuck out for you, that got to be a kind of a pillar or a good anchor that you could always go back to?
I think.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chris.
So like, if you're just talking about specifically and stuff that I've learned, maybe either through the show or recent conversations, I thought a lot about inverse Conway maneuver, which I don't know if that episode's published yet or not, probably not. And then as well as like FAST framework and the global day of mobbing, and a number of things out there. Like maybe there were ideas that didn't have names yet, and so just like mobbing was an idea that didn't really have a name yet, right? And so those sorts of things have created a taxonomy. And this kind of reminds me of like Willem Larson's kind of anthropologist role of a mob, right, is kind of giving names to things and then possibly even talking about it within the community so that it is a shorthand for everybody else. Those are all areas that I think have grown through that period of time. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And like Chris said, a lot of the ideas we share, names, have a long history that some span very deep into the history of the world even. But some of the principles, that the names that they're called today, that really that I really grab onto and are kind of my go-tos. So one is radical candor, and I know it shows up a lot of different ways, like psychological safety and other things. But I just love the graph of be direct and honest, but also kind and basically thoughtful. Just be, the way you do it, and so that is super simple, but so helpful in every situation on kind of the people side of things, right? And the other one I just keep going back to because maybe it's just so concretely in my mind when it comes to software development, is XP. So it's just like RadCan and XP. And of course, there's been modifications and improvements to the original ideas in the book in XP since 20 years ago. But the core principles, I just find myself experientially finding them true over and over and over again. And the language in which those principles are expressed, my mind just easily grasps onto. So those are the kind of the two go-tos for me.
I've also learned from one other peer coach where he said you don't change people's behaviors. You add new behaviors on top of it until the old behaviors are kind of shadowed. And I've learned that as I learn new things, or as the people I'm with learn new things, there sometimes can get to be a conflict between kind of the new gods and the old gods, if you will. So I've got two questions left. The first one might not be a long answer, but as you've gone through your own Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, your own experiential thing, and you talked with other people, have you found yourself, and maybe how do you navigate the interviews where somebody might be a little bit earlier in their journey than you are, but all the more confident, and they're telling you the best way to get the best estimates. If you can just get better estimates, you can get better delivery. Have you encountered those types of challenges where you find that somebody is passionately going down a path that you've learned is probably not going to get them where they need to be?
Yeah. Well, for me, over and over again.
What's that?
I think it happens all the time. And that's part of the whole automating the conversation, right? Is trying to find good ways to approach that. Why I wrote the software estimation paradox blog, which is one of my favorites. I think that so there are things out there like the Dunning-Kruger effect, and then there's also the fundamental attribution bias and a number of other things that you deal with when interacting with other people. And I think in general, you need a series of stories, or you need something to like lead people from one thing to the next, and or appealing to authority and finding a resource from a place that they trust. And so it's like if the person you're trying to convince reads Harvard Business Review, then find an article from Harvard Business Review, because they might not ever listen to you, but they might listen to that.
Yeah. That's good stuff. And I guess for me, going back to the two things I just said, I think I just go back to radical candor and just be sincere and authentic as I possibly can be, and just being like, okay, they're saying something different. Let me ask questions and learn as much as I possibly can be from them, because maybe they know a fact, or they know a thing that shows why estimates are the best way and we just need to do them better or something like that. And then once I've really heard them out, then to, do the other healthy side of the conversation is to be like, well, let me share some things with you, and so just to sincerely engage in curiosity and advocacy for what seems correct to me, and just see where it goes naturally.
I'm not going to lie. Right now, I'm thinking about going through LinkedIn and seeing if I can find somebody from my past to bring onto your show to really push those limits there. I want to how much patience you have.
Nice.
All right. So in closing here, thank you all very much. Are there any things in the future for Mob Mentality that you would like to share with my audience today? Are there things that you're planning on to, pimp your show a little bit more? Places you want to go?
I'm pulling up a Kanban board so we can get feedback on our queue. Yeah, I mean, some half-baked ideas of where things might go, and where we love hearing people's ideas for what they want to see on the show. Just kind of reading stuff off. Healthy team mob makeup, video series based on books we've read. So we did that a little bit before. More with AI. There's some wild ideas about making AI the guest of the show. So more episodes inspired by movies. So I think by the time this episode comes out, we've done one inspired from Top Gun. So maybe more like that. We have some episodes responding to people's questions from the community. So that's always a thing. I don't know, Chris, anything else you got out there?
Just, live broadcasts at different music venues around the world, like starting with Coachella, or no, I have no idea what I'm talking about. So I like to see things grow. I like, I think, like Austin was saying, the momentum is invigorating. So I think as long as there's momentum, then things just keep coming along. We're very improvisational, I guess, a little bit, and so kind of steering this in an agile and lean way, I think, is just kind of the way to go. It's just we crank through the queue, and new ideas are constantly coming in, and it's every episode is our feature release to production.
Yeah, and sometimes the improv will be, hey, I just experienced a thing yesterday and I really want to talk about it, and so it'll be like a fresh experience. Often we'll jump to the top of the queue. So, yeah.
Chris, Austin, thank you very much. I appreciate all that you do for the community. On behalf of the community, thank you for putting this podcast together, for having all the content out there. I find it very beneficial, and I see that a lot of other people do too. I also appreciate you guys being willing to try something a little bit different, a little bit weird, flip it on its head, and have some fun. I've been enjoying myself immensely today, so thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dustin. This is a really cool idea, and we appreciate you for it. And yeah, we'll see everybody on the next episode then, I guess.
Yeah, big time. Thanks so much, Dustin.
Yes, and I have to say this, been wanting to make sure you smash that like and subscribe button.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. See ya.